We're so glad to be here together tonight, friends and colleagues from across the country for MCLive. This is the monthly gathering space where our Ministers' Council family of the American Baptist churches and ecumenical colleagues are able to gather to tend to what we call the 3 C's: collegiality, competence, and centeredness. It's such a joy to create this space together for equipping and sharpening, for ministerial excellence. May it bring glory to Jesus Christ. Amen. I'm Reverend Jackie Belisle, and I'm a member of the National Elected Leadership Team of the Ministers' Council. Glad to play a part in crafting MCLive generally and especially tonight as we welcome our colleague, Reverend Joe Gratzel from New Jersey. We encourage you to introduce yourselves in the chat box and to remember, of course, that tonight's session is being recorded as you make your choices about volume and video. Our guest tonight is Reverend Joe, and I just want to honor this brother's companionship, friendship, and wisdom. He has a number of years of experience, many decades, maybe a century or more of experience in partnership with area nonprofits there in his setting, providing mental health first aid and crisis intervention training to first responders, military service members, educators, clergy, and the public at large. A longtime member of the Ministers' Council, Joe leads and serves in New Jersey. I want to just offer a word of background about tonight's session. Joe and I check in on each other occasionally over the course of each year of ministry. The Spirit knit our hearts together, I think, more deeply and intently earlier this year as we reached out for conversation following the death of our colleague, Reverend David Van Brakel, in February. We began to imagine at that time what it would be like to begin a series for the Ministers' Council's family, really creating space, not only for deeper naming of the challenges of ministry today, stresses and trauma that we all engage in the trenches, but also to begin to name together with his expertise and the expertise of companions who will pick up the baton in future offerings in the coming weeks. What does it mean to build resilience? What does it mean to heal well, grieve well, travel well, and intentionally on purpose build resilient communities? Tonight's presentation, From Crisis to Competent Community, being an umbrella for that conversation. Joe, we're so grateful that you're with us, and I want to just open the space for you now to lead and guide. I know we'll have plenty of opportunity for interaction during the session and as we approach the end of the hour. Joe?
Thank you, Jackie. I am losing my voice, so my apologies. I don't usually sound this sexy. I think that the box on your screen that says Denise might be my friend and co-author of this little piece that we're going to be working through tonight, Denise Wagaman. Denise Wagaman, if that's you, let me know, send something in the chat, wave, do something. And if you're not some other Denise from out there in the world, or it could be my wife, Denise, she also likes me and she might be on, but I have too many Denises in my life. So Denise, if you're my Denise in any way, shape or form, let us know who you are. If I've been doing this for a century, then Dave Berby has been doing it at least as long as I have, because we were neighbors at Eastern Baptist Theological Seminary. And can I just tell one of my absolute favorite seminary stories? Dave's wife was a school teacher, and she had chicks in the spring, as school teachers often do. And when the chicks hatched and she didn't know what to do with them, Kirk Higbee, who was a farm boy at heart, decided that he was going to hide them at the seminary and raise them. And so the Eastern Baptists used to have an old condemned swimming pool in the back of the property. And Kurt brought the chickens down there and had a little hen house full of chickens. And everybody knew that they were there except the administration. And we would take our kids down there and they would feed the chickens and look at the chickens. And one day the chickens got loose and they were running through the backyard of the seminary. And Norma Byrne comes running out of the office going, "Why are the chickens in the backyard?" And it was probably one of the highlights of my entire seminary career. So it doesn't get better than that. So thank you all. I appreciate you being on and appreciate this opportunity to be with you. What I'll be sharing tonight is born out of experience in the community where I serve. And I'm going to put a link before I forget in here for everyone. This is also in a PDF. If you want to click that link, you're welcome to it. I don't claim to have any wisdom that you all maybe don't already have. I'm looking around the room and there's a lot of snow up on the roofs for most of us. And so we've been around the block a few times. So I don't claim to have any wisdom that you all don't have. What I just have here is one model that has worked for us in our community. I've been pastor at First Baptist Church in Manasquan for 27 years. It's been 10 of the happiest years of my life. And we have gone through our share of challenges in our community. And through that, we developed with time a little bit of a model that we've used. And I think it can be used in really any kind of a community setting. And in fact, I think Jackie and I in our conversations and what really kind of brought us to this is we'd love to see a model like this happening in our collegial community and ministers council in, for such a time as this. How many of you in whatever setting you are, whether it's still actively in ministry or in retirement, or maybe now you're a member in a church and kind of watching and laughing as the poor pastor is struggling along and you get to sit in the pew, like wherever you are in the ministry here, is the world different in church today than it was when you started your career? Right. So I'm just going to ask you to just kind of share, like, what's short version, what's different in the church and in ministry in 2023 than it was in 2013 and 2003 and 1993, and what's different? But you got to talk or type it in the chat or do sign language.
The first thing that comes to my own mind is just the degree of indifference or animosity about the church and not seeing it as a trustworthy, credible place.
Thank you.
Yeah, numbers are different.
Absolutely. So numbers in terms of giving, and if you adjusted for cost of living, giving is down, attendance is down, regularity of attendance is down, diversity of attendance has probably changed. Some of you probably were ministering in a period of time where you had cradle to grave membership and maybe equal representation across the lifespan. Many of us don't have equal representation across the lifespan anymore. Okay, what else is different?
Fewer seminary students and clergy.
Absolutely, fewer people coming on board. That's an excellent point. Thank you, Michael.
I think there's less of a distinction between life inside the doors and outside the doors. I mean, if you close your eyes and listen, it's hard to tell whether you're inside the church or outside the church. Just the people are as anxious inside the church as they are outside the church, and there's no distinction about what's going to make it better or different.
And it's
I think
polar.
the world has affected the church more than the church has affected the world, I guess is another way to say it.
Okay. And would you also say the polarization that's out there is also quote unquote in here? Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good point. All right.
There's also the model that I kind of grew up with the pastor as a scholar servant, and that's kind of changed to be an entrepreneurial, charismatic, somebody who can start a business type of idea instead of it's a different model.
You have to be a jack of all trades to be in ministry today. That's a great point. Okay, so the ministry world has changed, and do we want to sound like, I mean, Jackie's the youngster in the group, but we don't want to sound like a bunch of crabby old people and say that it's just not the same world it used to be, right? And the challenges are there. There certainly are more resources available. We couldn't have done this even 5 years ago. Most of us weren't Zooming. Early in the pandemic, we all had a crash course in Zoom. We didn't have the technology, we didn't have cameras, we didn't have any of those things. We have a crash course. It was harder to build and maintain relationships across a wider connection. I think this has been really a blessing, and there are more resources, and I think that's an important thing to talk about today. Is there are more resources that we can connect to, and I think that's really helpful. I think to Jonathan's point, one of the challenges is if all you want is good preaching. And I'll give myself credit for being a halfway decent preacher. If all you want is good preaching, there's lots of better preachers that you can listen to from the comfort of your own home, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You don't have to come to First Baptist Church in Manasquan to hear good preaching. You could get it pretty much anywhere. So I better have something that's different than just good preaching that you might get if you listen to whoever your favorite flavor is out there in terms of good preachers. I'm going to pop up my screen share here a second because it'll keep me honest. Jackie's not close enough to me to throw things at me, which is my preference. So she's going to wave something at me later and tell me it's time for me to shut up. I won't be offended at all when she does that because I lack the ability to do that if someone doesn't tell me to. So we're going to talk about a couple things. We're going to talk about what a competent community might be. We're going to talk about who the folks are that might be stakeholders in that competent community. And we're talking about wouldn't it be wonderful if we could build competent communities before the fecal matter hit the oscillating device? And then we're going to talk about what do we do with that competent community if we come to the crisis after the crisis has happened. So I've been a pastor in my church here in Manasquan for 27 years. I also, as Jackie mentioned, I also work for an organization called Preferred Behavioral Health Group, and I have a independent consulting company that does training and consulting. And I train people in a course called Mental Health First Aid. I'm not a mental health professional. I train people who are not professionals how to recognize, understand and respond to someone who's having a mental health or substance use problem or crisis. I teach law enforcement officers, I teach soldiers, veterans, educators, community members, clergy. So I teach in a lot of different venues, and I'm also on the steering committee for our county's CIT, Crisis Intervention Team. And so I do that kind of work. And I came to it through the back door because of a suicide crisis in the community where I lived and raised my kids. In the Manasquan area, 13 years ago, we had actually it's a little more than that now, 15 years ago, we had a suicide contagion in which we lost 11 young people and a 3-year people, almost all of them young men who died by train. And because of that, I got involved in the community in a different way. My kids were in high school at that time, some of my kids. And so I was involved as an involved parent, as a clergy person in the community, as someone who was invested. This is the town I lived in, and these kids were, my neighbors. And so I got involved in it And so that's sort of what brought me to it. And since then, in addition to doing training and doing suicide prevention, I also do what's called suicide postvention. Excuse me. And that means that I'm one of the folks who comes after a tragic loss and helps the community work through that loss, access resources, and then build prevention strategies on the other side. Unfortunately, one of the things we say is a good postvention is good prevention. So if you do your postvention well, then hopefully you will prevent the next loss or suicide. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about tonight. This is real interactive. We're a small group, so please raise your hand, pop things in the chat, interrupt me if I don't see you, and I'd love to have your participation. So what are some of the crises in the setting where you are today that you and the folks that are around you might need to respond to?
Active shooter kind of situation in our community.
Okay, active shooter. That's a scary one. Thank you.
Homelessness.
Homelessness. Thank you.
And the whole mental health suicide syndrome is alive and well, unfortunately.
So mental health and suicide and suicidality,
Mhm.
absolutely on the increase in most corners of our country. And gun violence has become the number one killer of children in America. Of children in America. So suicide used to be number 2. Accidents used to be number 1. Gun violence has moved to the number 1 slot in America for death for children.
Economic uncertainty.
Okay, economic challenges, absolutely. Just the overall inflationary spiral that we might be in, and then unique communities may have, the steel mill might have closed, or those kinds of things that might be unique to one particular community. Excellent. Thank you, Jonathan.
Loneliness.
Loneliness and isolation. Absolutely. Coming out of COVID, there are still a lot of very isolated people. Thank you. We might also have, a tragic accident, the bus coming home from the high school football game, that kind of an event. You can have a natural disaster. We survived Superstorm Sandy here in my community. You could have wildfires if you're out west. You could have tornadoes if you're in the middle of the country, right? There are lots of things that there are things that we can see coming and sort of be thinking, oh, we should be coming to a response to this. And there are those things that just happen out of the blue, over which we have no control, and all we can do is respond, right? So a lot of different ways that we can experience crisis. So here's got a couple quick definitions. You're always supposed to define your terms. So the first is a competent community is a population that is aware of resources and alternatives, can make reasoned decisions about issues facing the group, can cope adaptively with problems, and it parallels the concept of positive mental health. So this sort of goes to, I think it was Jonathan's point earlier, which is the pastor used to be the wise teacher person in the community. And now not only are you the wise teacher person, you're also the social worker. You're also the chief cook and bottle wash. You're expected to know where everybody should turn in a particular crisis. And the role has certainly expanded over time. I would imagine, David, over your career, that some of what you did was, I'll use a non-Baptist word, but some of what you did was sacramental ministry, right? And but an awful lot of what you do as a chaplain is social worky kind of ministry, almost more directly than even, and I don't know if we want to shade the two, but there's almost a difference between pastoral care and social work that we kind of do in ministry today, right? So I think we all signed on to be pastoral care people. I don't know any of us knew when we signed up that we were going to be social workers. Although John's got a D-Min, so he might have thought he was going to be doing more of that. Right. But I don't think that's what we thought we'd be doing. Right. So in the competent community, we know where to look. We know where the resources are. We know who we can talk to. A second definition, competent community members collaborate effectively in identifying problems and needs in the community. They achieve consensus on some goals and the priorities. They agree on the ways to do that, and they collaborate and take the required action. So it's just the community come together around the kinds of things that we just mentioned earlier: homelessness, mental health challenges, economic challenges, natural disasters, all those things that can pop up as a crisis. So if we're going to be a competent community, we have to start with the question, okay, what's happening in our community, right? What's the thing that has us all scratching our head? After the suicide contagion in our community, we're blessed to have a wonderful ministerium in our community. And we were at a ministerium meeting, and the pastor down the street at the Methodist church said, hey, listen, y'all, we need to do something. Like, okay, what is it we need to do? She said, I just lost a 20-year-old young man to a heroin overdose. A kid that grew up in church, wasn't here all the time, but I knew his family, star football player, went off to college, did well. But unbeknownst to me, over time, the parents hadn't come to me and shared, had been developing a habit, had been, I think, to a couple of rehabs, and seemed to be doing well, and died of a heroin overdose. I don't know anything about heroin. This was 8-10 years ago when the opioid crisis was just beginning, and we were sort of just seeing these rises in numbers. And we said, you know what? I don't know anything about heroin either, but it's clearly a problem in our community. And then in pretty quick succession, the retired chief of police, his son died of a heroin overdose. A dear friend that was a school nurse in the community, her nephew died of a heroin overdose. And, we started saying, wow, we need to remember what we did last time and kind of bring that back together. And it was really that second crisis that sort of got us to start working around how to make a model for this that's reproducible. So, what's happening? Jackie and I had a conversation, and the conversation that sort of prompted us was we just lost a colleague to suicide. And what is it in 2023 that's in the water that is affecting the people around us, that people that we know and love who seem to be well-resourced, seem to be people of faith, seem to be people of, intelligence, seem to have all the things that we'd say to live for. If, you could make a list of all the things that one would have to live for. And when we were struck by that tragic loss, we just felt compelled that we needed to talk about that. Is there a competency that's lacking in our community that we could be building into it? And so I'll tell you that I went to our association of, our association, our region. We have a monthly lunch. And after our colleague's passing, I just said, if our colleague had called you the day they took their life, would you have even known what to do? And I know that some of you would say, yes, I know what I would do. I know the steps. I know what I would do. I know the questions I would ask. I know how I would respond. But some of you and many of our colleagues said, no, I really wouldn't know what to do. Some of them said, yeah, Joe, I'd call you. I said, well, thanks. That's a great thing to say. But do we know that? Do we know what we would do? And so that whole idea of community competency, really, we don't have the ability, Jackie and I, with all our positive vibes, or the 6 of us here on the screen, we don't have the ability to change the entire culture of ABCNJ's professional clergy. But ABC USA's professional clergy. But oh my gosh, isn't this a competency that our community needs? And how could we get there? And so that kind of is what occasioned this. But what's happening? And then so the second question is, who's affected by it? So I'll take the example of the opioid crisis that we had. And these weren't, and you probably have all gone through this in your own thinking as the opioid crisis built. We used to have a word for people who died of an overdose of an opioid. What do we call them? Don't be polite.
Addicts.
Drug addicts.
We weren't even that polite. What did we call them before that?
Junkie.
We called them junkies.
Yeah, they were drug addicts.
Right. Okay. They were junkies. They were drug addicts, right? They were Skid Row bums. They were them. They weren't us. They weren't our friends' sons and daughters. They weren't our members of our church's sons and daughters. They weren't the kids that played on our high school football team. They weren't the kids that went to the prom with our daughters and their sons. They were them. Right. And so, okay, we've changed the language. Now we don't say junkie anymore. We say a person with a substance use disorder, and we've changed the language. But we like, who's being affected all of a sudden when it's us, right? Now, right? When will we finally cure HIV/AIDS? When straight white men start dying of it, right? And as long as a significant number of straight white men aren't dying of HIV/AIDS, we're probably not going to spend a lot of money trying to cure it, right? That's just a fact. But boy, as soon as white families started losing their sons and daughters to opioid deaths, boy, there was a clamor that we had to do something about it. So I live in a very affluent area, 10 miles north of Snooki and 10 miles south of Springsteen, and 1 mile from the Atlantic Ocean. The parking lot that was behind my church just got torn down, and the 3 houses that are being built in its place are each $1.8 million. So I live in a very affluent area. And so when it started affecting our kids, it was pretty easy to get people to say, we have to do something. So we started asking, who's already there? Who's already on the front lines, and who's working upstream, and how can we start bringing those things to bear? So we started with a core group, right? Our local ministerium, Pastor Reggie came to us and she said, hey, we have to do something. I said, I know a couple of people, right? So Reggie said, hey, just come down to my place. We'll have coffee. We'll talk with those people. So we got a couple of people together at a core that had some core knowledge of the topic that we were talking about, right? We had some people from the recovery community. We had some people from the prevention community, right? We had some clergy. We invited some folks from the school, and we had this small group of people who were concerned about the problem, concerned about the community, concerned about whatever the need was. And we all sort of came together and said, okay, what can we do? Right. And then if possible, find some people who are credentialed in that area. Right. Everybody is an armchair expert today, but there are actually people out there who have
Yeah.
credentials. Let's get somebody with some credentials and invite them to come and educate the core group about whatever the crisis may be. When the suicide contagion began in our community, none of us had broad expertise or understanding of suicide. So we reached out to the County Traumatic Loss Coalition and we said, hey, I have no idea what you're going to teach us, but we're having lunch next week. We wish you'd come. And I said to the other clergy, I said, I don't know what we're going to do, but the very minimum we could do is we can all get together and pray while we're waiting to see what we could do next. And I didn't say that glibly. I said, let's just come and we'll pray. And, you know, we invited some people and we got an education, right? So same thing when the opioid crisis came, we just said, what can you do? Who can we invite? How can we get some people involved? So we started with that small group. And then we said, okay, to each one of us, if it was the 6 of us, you know, Michael, who do you know? Right? Who do you know in your sphere of influence that can bring something to bear on this problem that we're talking about? David, who do you know? John, who do you know? Jonathan, who do you know? And we started getting, and Jackie brings somebody in, and everybody said, well, I know the superintendent of schools. I know the chief of police. I know the person at the county office. Our denomination has somebody who does this. And we started from that core group of just 5, and we moved to a next layer of folks that got a little bit bigger. Right. And so we got local government, we got law enforcement, we got other clergy, we got people who were licensed in mental health, we got our school folks. And then we started thinking about some of the community leaders like the Kiwanis and the Rotary and the Elks and the Community Sport League, and who are all the other people that are out there that are movers and shakers in our community. And we invited them to come together. From that core group, we said, okay, what can we do with all these folks, and brought them together to what we called our roundtable group. And that group had about 20 people included it. We didn't always get 20 people out, but we had 20 people. And we just said, hey, let's all come together. Let's meet each other. Let's know everybody who's at the table. And then we just did good old fashioned brainstorming, right? Put newsprint up on the wall, and everybody wrote the different things that they thought were problems, and they kind of fell under some common umbrellas. And then when we gave everybody a sticky dot, and, you know, we said, go and put a sticky dot next to the one you think's the most important. And we identified the challenges that we all agreed were the crisis in our community. Right. And then we talked about, you know, what the problem was, what our goals would be, how we would implement the goals if we got to them, and what we could do effectively to make that happen. So from that next group, okay, skip ahead here. Oop, okay. We decided to say to each of those people at the round table, your mission, right? So we've gone from 3 to 5 at the core group to the round table group, which is now 10 to 20. And we said, your mission, all of you, because you're movers and shakers in our community, whatever our community happens to be, whether it's Ministers Council or our local community, or right, just in your community, your mission is to go and personally invite 5 people to the next event. Right. And then we got names and addresses for all those people that they were going to invite. And we sent letters by snail mail. Jackie, when we were young, snail mail were things that we had that had paper and it had like a stampy thing on it. Your mother might have told you about that.
When we start the fellowship at 8:01, I'm going to tell you how old I am.
But so we said, your mission is to get 5 other people here. Right. And the idea was, if I invited somebody in David's sphere, they might not come. But if Dave invited them and said, hey, I'm part of this thing that's happening in town, we're really concerned about this issue that's really the talk of the town. We have a group of people who want to do something about it. Would you come to a meeting? Invitation only. So it made it a little snobby.
Well, no, actually, what I'm hearing you unpack here just really feels clearly strategically relational. You know, well-paced, not overwhelming, right? Like just, you know, focus and follow-up and relational.
Absolutely. Because if you went to the mayor of our town,
right,
and if I threw a rock and it would hit his house, that's how close it is to my church. And you said, excuse me, Mayor Donovan, do you all have a competent community model in Manasquan? He would look like at you like you had 7 heads. But at 3 o'clock in the morning, if a teenager steps in front of a train, the chief of police is going to call me at my house. I'm going to call my friend Denise. She's going to call our friend Susan. I'm going to call a couple of clergy. And within 25 minutes to a half hour, we're going to have licensed clinical social workers on the ground talking to kids who are gathering because their friend just stepped in front of a train. Right. And the mayor probably doesn't know how to do that. So it's not about where you are on the organizational chart. It's about your relationships in the community, which is why it's really hard in a polity where people are blow-in clergy, which is, I know, is changing more and more. But I don't see how somebody, no disrespect to our colleagues in other traditions, I don't see how you can come into a community and in 2 or 3 years, integrate yourself into the community the same way you can when you have longevity in a community. So absolutely, Jackie, it is 100% relational. And I'm not looking for people merely because of their role. I'm leveraging the relationships that I have that will bring people to the table who have influence in the community. And so in our case, we might say, well, who are some of the regional execs who have a heart for this? Let's bring them to the table. Who are some of the licensed people that we have in our denomination who have experience in this? Let's get them to the table, right? Who are some of the national experts we can reach out to because somebody in that second circle knows a national expert? One of the folks in our gatekeeper group knew Keith Elias, former New York Giants player, has a Christian guy, has a great testimony, very persuasive speaker. We used him as an opener, to get people to come. So once we did that gate, and every time you do an event in this, you have to have the date for the next event already planned, right? So when I invite the 5, I already have to have the 20 in mind, so I can tell the 5 when to bring the 20. When I get the 20 together, right, I have to have the date when I want the 100 to come. So the 20 leave with the date for the 100. And when we got the 100 people together, their mission was all to go find 5 people. And we got 500 people to fill the local theater because the 100 all used their personal influence to bring more people. And we filled the local theater. All right. The challenges I think you have to remember, and I even had to change my slide today because I had to change that big bullet instead of, you can't say cultural competence anymore. Does anybody know you're not allowed to say that anymore? If you say cultural competence, do this. It's old world. You can't say it anymore. You have to say cultural humility. Okay. Because the idea is just because my culture does things a certain way, I shouldn't assume that your culture is going to do it that way. Right. So just because my culture is able-bodied and my culture speaks English and my culture has cars to get to meetings, I better not assume that the people I'm trying to reach in this competent community in my next steps of outreach, I shouldn't assume that they speak English. I shouldn't assume that they speak at all. I shouldn't assume that they don't need an interpreter, sign language or otherwise. I should assume that they have the ability to get to the meeting that I'm hosting. I need to be sure that whatever barriers there might be to getting people who need to know this information and join with us in this work, I have to make sure I took care of all those barriers. And there were probably some I was never even aware of. I'm watching the clock here. And then listen, there are already services there, right? Once I start building this network of people, we're going to start finding people who need the services from the people that we're building up. Well, I don't need to reinvent the wheel. I could say, I happen to meet my new friend, John Del Heverland, and he's a D-Min and he's a family therapist, and he might be able to help you with this. Let's give John a call. Hey, John, it's Joe Gratzel. We're on the roundtable together in the community. I'm sitting here with my friend Harry. Harry has this challenge. I think I remember you saying that's something that you do. Might you be able to help Harry? Oh, you can't. Do you know who could?
Right.
Oh, David. Great. Listen, would you happen to have David's phone number? Great. Hey, David, John just told me that I should give you a call. I was talking to him, right? Like it's all relational. It's all relational. And we can beat our heads against the wall trying to find these resources for people. If we start from ground zero every time. But if you have these relationships in place wherever you are, right, it's a phone call. I was in a community last week. I had done a training at the County Police Academy early in the week. I happened to be in the town next to one of the police officers I trained. 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm leaving a training. He calls me up. He says, Joe, I need your help. I've got a longtime member of my community, always been a little bit of trouble, but never been in real big trouble. But his alcoholism is really getting bad. He's probably 50. His mom's probably 80. He's willing to do something today. I really need somebody he can talk to. I said, here's a cell phone number from a guy from the sheriff's office who's on the job. That's what he does. You call up, tell him you're a cop, tell him I sent you, right? Because we were able to make those relationships. I'm certainly in a unique position in some of the things that I do, but wherever your sphere is, wherever you are, you have the ability to create these relationships. And that's whether you, go ahead, I'm sorry.
It just, maybe we can come back to this in more depth when we're done, when your presentation is over, but I want to lift up what we talk about with the 3 C's and this intersection of competence and collegiality and centeredness. And like, to me, you can't live into a thriving relational network like that unless you have the spiritual stamina to invest in those relationships and be intentional about it. I mean, it's, to me, there's just this, the intersection of those 3 is mighty. Leave that there.
No, but well, I appreciate that because isn't it a chicken and egg problem?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
If I don't invest in those things,
Yeah.
I won't have the energy to invest in those things, right? That, like, how do I get there? I think, I don't know what your style of ministry was, each of you in your, in where you are along the way, but Lone Ranger pastors, they don't make it. If you're you're here, you're already not a Lone Ranger because you're here, right? We have 5,000 some clergy, and not that all 5,000 should be here, but right, there's 5,000 clergy or more in our denomination. In your own association, how many of the pastors come out for the association breakfast or lunch or whatever it is you do in your association? Have them come for your rallies. Like, if we're not connected with each other, how are we going to do anything? And we're fortunate, our association, we have a great core of pastors that these are men and women I would call at 3 o'clock in the morning. But of the 27 in our association, only 8 or 9 of us come together. I'm guessing that's probably similar in your associations where you all are. Right. So yeah, I can't build the spiritual resources to do that. But if I don't have, it's very circular. And I do think it is where we lose the people we love. I mean, I think that if the people we love hit those rough patches and they don't have those bonds, or there isn't somebody who notices, when I teach the courses that I teach, I say, if you can come away with this sentence, I will have done my job. And the sentence looks like this: Hey, Jackie, I've noticed, fill in the blank, and I'm concerned. Why don't we fill in the blank? Right. I just told Jackie 3 things. I noticed. Second thing I told her is I'm not mad, I'm concerned.
Right.
And the third thing I said is, why don't we? What did I just tell her?
You're with her.
I'm with her. She's not alone. Right. And I wish, our colleague who passed, he was here in my church. I think it was 2 weeks, maybe 3, before he passed. And
he and I texted the day before he died.
Right. And I unfortunately, he was new. He'd come right during COVID. I didn't know him well. I don't want to sound, it just, if you asked me to define him, I would have said nice kid, 40 years old, just a nice kid, beautiful wife, great little kids. I would have said just a nice guy. I wish he was my next door neighbor. But when we haven't invested in those relationships, and sometimes I'm not faulting anybody, but when we haven't invested in those relationships, it's so hard to have the relationship currency to do these things. So I'm mindful of my time. I'm actually 2 minutes past when I told Jackie to throw something at me. After we did our big events, we came back to the small group again. And we said, okay, who didn't we include? Who should have been at the table that wasn't? right? Because we encountered people along the way and we said, you know, we really should have had somebody with this expertise or somebody with that expertise or someone with that knowledge or someone with that access, right? The other one is who should we politely marginalize because they just are not working out, like maybe lose their name on the email list or something. But, you know, who's somebody we want to be sure not to hand a big responsibility to or not to put in the forefront because they're not going along. And it's a volunteer army. It can be hard, but you have to have that conversation. And then what do we need to do to sustain this? You know, and that we don't have a formal structure that keeps this going, but we have a relational structure that keeps us going. And so when something happens in our community, we can respond so that, you know, 3 years ago on Labor Day weekend, a young boy drowned in the town north of us, right? So called me up and said, you know, Joe, hey, can you come in and talk to the lifeguards? And we did that. And I said, okay. And they said, well, can we do, you know, a prayer service on the beach? I said, yeah, but we're going to call the clergy that are in this town and they're going to come to the prayer service with us because this is their patch. This is where they're supposed to be, you know, tilling the Lord's garden. And so, you know, we do these things because we had these relationships that we could call people. And fellow walks up and introduced himself and wonderful Irish brogue. And he says, I am Father Damien and I've just been assigned to St. Margaret's Parish. And this is my first week. And I said, great, stand next to me because you represent the biggest group of Christians in this town. You're going to stand right here next to me. And then he started singing. And I said, oh, you're singing the next solo, buddy, because he had a beautiful voice, right? But how do we make those relationships and integrate people into those things right away? So what do we need to do to sustain this? And then once we've done this, can we create a process for what we do the next time the fecal matter hits the oscillating device, right? We've already built this. We already have all these people. We already have these relationships. How do we them in place so that when something happens, whether it's a suicide contagion this time or Superstorm Sandy rolling aboard or an opioid crisis or whatever the next crisis is we haven't imagined yet, do we still maintain those relationships? And as to Jackie's earlier point, many of those players will move on the board, right? The person who worked for the county, now they work for the state. The person who worked for the state is retired, but they're still in your town. And right, all those relationships may have changed, right? Some of you have changed hats in the last 10 years, but you may be in the same community, maybe some of the same relationships. I still want your knowledge, even if you don't still hold the same role. I still want your knowledge. I still want you on the team. So how are we going to create that triage team? We had a drowning Friday afternoon. Chaplain called me from the hospital. She said, Joe, I'm still at the hospital. The mom is still here. The dad died. The 20-year-old autistic son was on the beach and saw the whole thing. The little sister is in the ED. She's fine, but you know, she's being like, what can you do? I was like, you know what? I unfortunately I was in the middle. So I said, here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna reach out to the county mental health administrator. I'm gonna reach out to the head of the county chaplains and I'll see if they can reach out to you. But somebody said, hey, I'm gonna call Gratzel. He responds sometimes when there's a drowning. Right? It's not my job. It's a relationship that we have. The chaplain didn't know who to call, so she called me. I didn't know what to do. I mean, I couldn't respond in that moment, but I knew who to call. How do we build these relationships in our community? Right. So when we have one of these challenges that faces one of our colleagues talking about Ministers' Council broadly, right? Who do we call? You know, who do we bring alongside? Who do we get in a car with and drive to the person's house? Like, what do we do if we don't have these relationships? And Jackie hit it. Relationships are key. Right. So that's just a picture of how we did it. And I think that this can happen in a congregation. I think this can happen in a community. I think this can happen among colleagues like us in Ministers' Council. I think this model that you see here can move any group from a crisis to being a community of competence. And that's my whole shtick.
Well, I just really appreciate the wisdom and the care that you've articulated in describing these many painful circumstances, right? In which the Spirit has used you to be present in this network of care. Just want to open it up here for some open conversation with Joe, questions or testimonies, comments that you might have. We have a good 8 or 10 minutes of further absorption. And I really do appreciate Joe in opening this up the way you've engaged us throughout the hour in interaction. Yeah. comments from the field?
The thing I thought of was the Together in Ministry group is one
Mm,
avenue of building collegial support.
mhm,
The Ministers Council, I don't know many people from it. As a chaplain, we have sort of a chaplains group, which obviously is spread out geographically. And it's not the same as like you seeing, getting together for breakfast.
hmm
Um, so it kind of, I kind of hear it as an encouragement for me to be more intentional about trying to, and I have actually, quite a few in Northeastern Connecticut connections because I'm the only chaplain
Mm.
for hospice and for the hospital. And so I work with, the different churches. And I've noticed there's been a very high turnover rate in the different churches.
hmm
So you develop these relationships. I have a spiritual care advisory committee, and it's like different people all the time. It's difficult. I mean, I feel like I'm complaining, but I don't seem to have the same longevity of relationships that I did 10 years ago here.
Well, and Joe, to your point earlier, you named that longevity, right, as a specific variable, right, in the capacity to build these long-term relationships, those which may be a part of sustaining community in which those who are suffering may find what they need so that they don't make the choices of despair, whatever those are, but also that longevity as a variable in how well the ecosystem of care, of delivery, of networking and relationship is able to
So some of
be
that,
mobilized. Yeah.
so I think that for, again, well, welcome, Matt. Glad you're here. For some of us, the season that may have come for us may be the season of being the mentor. I was with a group of colleagues a few years ago, and I said to them, all male, and I said, gentlemen, just so you know, we are the silverback gorillas. Like, right? We are the guys that we used to look up to.
Mhm.
And so, those of us who have some years in the field, maybe where we're going to have to find those relationships might not be, up directed. It might not even be peer directed. We may have to invest in some of those relationships with younger colleagues in ways that will be life-giving for us and affirming for us, to be very honest. But I think also they'll challenge us a little bit and keep us on the growing edge. Somebody figure out where Matt is and just make Matt your new best friend. But
Mm.
right, like, I'm finding, for me, having some younger colleagues who are smarter than I've ever been and better read than I am, and hold multiple degrees, and I just barely hung on to the ones I have. Like, that's been a help for me, John. But Jonathan, I agree. It's harder to make those relationships, and there are fewer and fewer people who are staying in places for a long time.
Yeah. Well, and I do appreciate Jonathan lifting up the Together in Ministry groups, because as you think about that wonderful model, and there was more of a structured covenant during that first decade of funding, but we continue to carry the charge of investing in those. And from the national body, we have a board members, Lynn Story Bunce, specifically invested in helping to nurture, create, make people aware of funding to help continue create new ones. And so I think in a context like Connecticut, as I know invested stakeholders are imagining prayerfully how to reboot the Ministers' Council, that Together in Ministry model of groups is, I think, just so transformative, right? It lays the tracks for these connections.
And I think peer groups are a bit of a misnomer, right? Because I think it's all of these things, right? It's not the peer, like, we have exactly the same amount of experience, but it's all those relationships all in once, right? Every peer group I've been a part of, I've looked for the mentor, and then yeah, you're right, Joe. Eventually, now I'm starting to see, oh wait, I'm the old guy in the room, and now there are folks that are coming along and asking those same kind of questions, but still, we teach each other. So yeah, good.
So and Joe, there's a piece I want to just kind of catch on here that kind of catches on me in the because you're talking about a lot of critical incident or trauma type responses, and because we're also talking about how that can impact the responders, because to be perfectly transparent, I got real close to almost killing myself once, and I have a pretty severe post-traumatic stress injury as a result of my career, and I hid it well enough that people were shocked to find out about it. So, and I have really good relationships.
Mhm.
So, is there anything in your model, and I might have missed it, that is an intentional piece? It's something that I've been thinking about, and I haven't found I'm still spinning it around. It hasn't come down yet, but an intentional, I'm going to use debriefing because I come out of a military career,
Mhm.
but an intentional, regular debriefing of,
Mm,
how are you? And then after you get that first answer, it's the buttonhole of, no, but seriously, how are you? Because I think that's how we miss each other, because we ask the right questions, we say the right things, we have the right conversations, and then people walk away and kill themselves.
Yes,
I think that happens a lot,
absolutely.
because I went through a 21-year military career where I spent a lot of time counseling people who I had trained, who asked their friends all the right questions, and then they still killed themselves.
Yep.
Um, and um, and having been on the other side of that now, I see how easy that would have been to do. That I could have fooled everybody, and they would have been left saying, "We don't understand. How did this happen?" And it happens because, in part, because no matter how resilient we are, there is a point there where the stress outweighs our coping, and how do we keep from getting there is the point, and the relationships are part of the answer. But now I'm sorry, function
Nope.
of the injury. Now I lost my place. Well, I guess the question is there somewhere in the model, or is that something we still need to create for intentional, no kidding,
mm,
perfectly honest, maybe not forced sabbatical, but maybe forced sabbatical that is forced on us and whoever we work with, to say, this is life-saving care, whether we believe it or not, where we have to be honest and say, but no kidding, how am I really doing?
Amen. So David, I want to just first and foremost thank you for sharing that.
mhm,
That was very helpful for us to get an insight. The second thing I want to highlight a word that you used, because we haven't learned to use this, and you said PTSI, right? You didn't say PTSD. And so again, one of those places where we're changing language. Okay, so we're talking about a post-traumatic stress injury or post-traumatic stress illness, right? And I think that language change really helps us understand that if you had a premorbid brain scan of David's brain and you had a brain scan today, you would see that there is a physiological change to David's brain because of his post-traumatic stress injury. So I think it's important for us to acknowledge that we need to change our language around post-traumatic stress and recognize that it is a brain insult. So I appreciate you for saying that. I don't think the model that I presented today deals with the individual issue that you're talking to. So I don't think it was intended to. I think you highlight the challenge that brought Jackie and I to this discussion really well. And I'm certainly going to ask my clinical friends to weigh in here, but I would just say every other field, and your military career included, has fitness for duty. Right? There's fitness for duty criteria, and we don't talk about that in ministry. We don't talk about fitness for duty in ministry, and I think we should. The other thing is, when I'm talking to cops or I'm talking to soldiers, no one wants to be the one who
Right.
makes their friend seen as unfit for duty. But when I tell cops that the likelihood of the person on your left or right dying by suicide is statistically higher than the likelihood of them dying by felonious assault, or I say to, your battle buddy on your left or your right, like, do you want that person defending your left or your right flank if they're not fit for duty? We don't talk about that in ministry.
Yeah.
And we don't talk about that particularly in our polity, because our polity creates Lone Rangers.
Yeah.
And so I think you make a great point, and I think the Together in Ministry point is one of that. But are we willing to say to that colleague, hey, I've noticed, I'm concerned, why don't we? I'm guessing there were people around you, Dave, even if you think you had them fooled, there were enough people who should have been twigged to how you were feeling to have noticed enough to say something. But in the frame of all the things that were happening, and we don't have these conversations because there's so much stigma, it's a hard question to ask somebody.
Well, it certainly is. Yeah.
I mean, have all of you asked somebody about suicidal intent?
Yeah.
Right? It's a hard question to ask somebody, right? Because your biggest fear is they're going to say yes.
Yeah.
Right. And then the two words that come to your mind immediately are, oh, and shit.
Yeah.
Well,
It's one of the problems, I do inpatient psych groups, and there's people who are suicidal who tell you they're suicidal, and there's nothing you can do. They get out of the inpatient unit and 2 weeks later they commit suicide. It's a terrible illness.
So
Yeah.
I'm gonna my last point, unless somebody asks me a specific question, because the clock is running.
Yeah.
So I have an example that I give, and I don't have a second one, but have you all ever had a day that felt like this? Right? Beat up from the feet up, tore up from the floor up. Right? What do you got to do tomorrow? Got to do it again, right? Day 2, worse than day 1. Had a day 2 that looked like that? What do you got to do on day 3? Right? So some of you military folks have done MRT, right? What's that called? That ability of my bottle to bounce back?
Resilience.
Resilience. How many times can I do that to this bottle?
I don't know, 70 times 7.
Is it finite? Is it finite or infinite? It's finite, right?
Yeah.
Right. And this is an awful lot of us. So I then give, when I teach in person, I give the biggest, buffest looking person in the room a full bottle, and I ask them to squeeze it, and they can aim it at me when they do that. No one's ever got the lid off. You can't squeeze the full bottle. And those are protective factors. And that's the short version of the answer to your question, Dave, is how do we build protective factors
Right.
into our lives and into the lives of the people around us? I'm
Right.
done. I promise.
well, with that, my colleagues, I would say that how do we build protective factors is intrinsically related to the vocation of the Ministers' Council, which has endured since 1935, facing different eras and challenges of history, social changes, ministry changes. And doing so with different levels of formal capacity, relational capacity, etc. I want to introduce our president, Matt Sturdivant from Lawrence, Kansas, who's going to just offer a bit of a closing wrap-up word here as we prepare to part. And Matt, while you do that, I'm going to drop a few announcements in the chat box. Joe, thank you so much for helping us to move this needle into the next iterations of conversation and honesty. Each of you, thank you for sharing, whether you shared out loud or not. And Dave, special blessing for you for articulating some things we're going to carry down the field. Matt?
Thank you. First, a quick apology. I was drafted to teach Zacchaeus at Vacation Bible School tonight, and so I didn't get to. I look forward to watching the recording later and reviewing notes. But thank you for a hard conversation. Thank you, Joe. Thanks for all of you who said, "Hey, this looks like an exciting thing to do on a Thursday night." But of course, it's an important thing to do on a Thursday night. So thanks for making it a priority this evening, and thanks for what you do, each of you. To do this work. I've been blessed the last several weeks to be around a lot of national folks who are asking these same questions. How can we do clergy health better? And so you all are doing it well, but we could all do it better. It's kind of, I think that's kind of the answer that I heard there at the end was there's no magic one thing that'll do it, right? And so you're doing a lot of the things, and thank you for the things. But we want to do more, and so thanks for the part that you're doing, and thanks for your prayers and patience as we all try to figure out how to do it better. But I'd love to share a word of prayer if it'd be appropriate as we finish our time together and continue on with our work that goes on. Lord, I'm thankful for the vulnerability shared, the honesty, the hope, the clarity that has been shared this evening. God, we pray that we might continue to find ways to be people that practice those things on a regular basis and help others to do it as well. Lord, I thank you for those who have been the mentors that we've needed, the peers that we needed, the proteges that we needed. I thank you too for the folks that we will meet tomorrow or the next day who might need us in a different way, and who we need in a different way. Lord, I thank you for those who have continued this conversation and those who understand the need to put clergy health on a top priority of a long list of things that the church is facing these days. Thank you for these folks and all of our ministers who do good work, whatever their context, whatever their geography, whatever their personality, and whatever their place. In your name we pray. Amen.
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 Amen. God bless you all. Godspeed as you go.